Remain.
ሰላም እንዴት ናችሁ? የዓለም አቀፍ ሴቶች ቀንን ለማክበር ነው። ዛሬው አጀንዳችን ምንድነው? ብዙ ጊዜ ሴቶች ወይንም ሙቭመንት ውስጥ ያለን ሴቶች ብዙ አይነት ኤፈርት አድርገናል አይደለ? ግን ሁሌ ምን አረጋችሁ ይኸው ሴት የተደፈረች ምንድነው እየተባለ አንደርማይን ይደረጋል፣ ይናቃል፣ የምንሰራው ስራ ቦታ አይሰጠውም። ምን የሚል ሀሳብ አመጣን? ሁሌ ማርጄትን ስናወራ ላይክ ችግሮቹ እንዳሉ ሆነው ዊኖቻችንን እኛ በምናደርገው ስትራግል ግን ምን አይነት ለውጥ መጣ የሚለውን ዛሬ ለመነጋገር ነው የመጣ ነው። የምንወደው ቦታ የራሳችን ሰውነት እኛ ራሳችንን ይሹሩ እንበላት ታፕ ያደረግን እዚህ የነካል የምንወደውን ሰው ወይንም የምንወደውን ቦታ
እንደሚችል የሃራስመንት ኮድ ኢፌክት አምጥቷል ማለት ነው። መልቲፕል ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች ከዛ በኋላ ያንን የዩኒቨርሲቲ አፕዴት ማድረግ ችለዋል ኮዱን ማለት ነው ህጉን።
it's really difficult like ሴቶች ስለማይችሉ አይደለም እንዳይችሉ ከሚጎትታቸው ነገሮች እነሱ አሁን ሪቫይዝ ያስደረጉት የሃራስመንት ኮድ አንዱ ነው።
አይዞሽ
Wonder Woman
Muyomba, who are sign language interpreters. For our teams that need translation, I hope that you're catered for. In case you are not, just kindly raise your hand and the teams from FIDA will. You're welcome. Kindly allow me welcome the team lead from FIDA Uganda, Ms. Lilian Biarugaba Adriko, to open this particular event, and then we'll continue with the program. You're welcome, Lilian.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. The guest of honor, that was supposed to be Ambassador Bagire Vincent Waiswa, who graciously delegated to the head of legal and social affairs, Ambassador Mugera, and your counterpart, and honorable justices of the courts of judicature, the Commissioner, Gender and Women Affairs, Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, she is on the way here, representatives of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the African Court on Human and People's Rights, representatives from the Ministries of Gender, Foreign Affairs, and other government ministries, representatives from the Ministry of, not the ministry, but from the International Association of Women Judges, representatives from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, colleagues from women rights organizations and civil society across the Greater Horn of Africa, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, fellow civil society organizations, a very good morning to you all. On behalf of the Uganda Association of Women Lawyers, it is an honor and privilege to welcome you to this regional gender forum convened under the theme, Justice Beyond Borders, Regional Mechanisms and Women's Rights in the Greater Horn of Africa. The theme reflects the very spirit of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which deliberately speaks not only of human rights, but of people and human and people's rights, of human and people's rights. This dual framing reminds us that justice in Africa is both individual and collective. It protects the dignity of each woman and girl, while also recognizing the shared struggles of communities scarred by conflict, displacement, patriarchy, and poverty. It captures the reality that the rights of women cannot be realized in isolation from the well-being of their societies, and that accountability must extend beyond borders, which is why you see the representation is as diverse as it is today morning, from the national to the regional and to the continental level. Just for me to provide a bit of context to why we are here today, the realities of women in the Greater Horn of Africa, in South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Djibouti, and Uganda, are shaped by cross-border conflict, fragile governance systems, and discriminatory laws and practices, harmful and cultural religious practices, conflict-related sexual violence, political exclusion, and entrenched systematic barriers that persist, which makes this convening both. Yet even with these challenges, why they exist, pathways to justice can be strengthened through solidarity and existing regional mechanisms, such as the convening that we have today. At the national level, courts, parliaments, and ministries remain the first guardians of women's rights. Yet weak enforcement, lengthy delays in case adjudication, and entrenched discrimination often leave survivors without remedy. It is these moments of systemic challenges that the African human rights system becomes indispensable. Through the African Commission and the African Court, women's struggles can move beyond borders, transforming individual cases into regional precedents and holding governments accountable to continental standards. When even regional remedies are constrained, we must turn to complementary mechanisms within and beyond the African system, most notably universal jurisdiction. the principle ensures that no grave violation from conflict-related sexual violence to mass atrocities escapes accountability, regardless of where it occurs. It additionally ensures adequate and commensurate compensation. Together, these three systems, that is the national systems, the Africa human rights system, and the universal jurisdiction, from a framework of justice beyond borders, perfectly align with the theme of this forum. They remind us that justice for women must not stop at the boundaries of the state, but must extend across the region and the continent. To this framework, I must add that transitional justice adds yet another dimension. It's anchored in the AU Transitional Justice Policy, transitional justice processes, truth-telling, preparation, and accountability, guarantees non-reoccurrence and complements litigation and prosecution, while also addressing the deeper structural injustices that women face. In the same way, the Maputo Protocol provides the most comprehensive framework for women's rights on the continent, obliging states to act on violence, reproductive rights, political participation, and equality before the law. And through instruments such as the Commission on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, the African Union has recognized the urgency of addressing conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence as a core peace and security issue. When these frameworks are fully ratified, domesticated, and implemented, they can transform women's lived realities in the Greater Horn of Africa. But when they are ignored, delayed, or clawed back, we must keep pushing and demanding accountability and advancing justice beyond borders. This forum, therefore, invites us to focus on assessing how effectively the African human rights system is being used to advance women's rights, to promoting ratification and domestication of critical frameworks such as the Maputo Protocol, the AU Transitional Justice Policy, and the Commission on Ending Violence Against Women, among others. It also calls on us to strengthen regional feminist alliances for cross-border litigation, advocacy, and solidarity. For those of you that have been with us for the last 2 days, I think you can bear testimony, or you bear testament to the fact coordination going on the last 2 years, and that once you leave the room today, we will not remain the same. We will be a stronger feminist movement. As FIDA Uganda, working closely with our partner, that is the Strategic Initiative for the Women in the Horn of Africa, commonly known as SIHA, and because also FIDA Uganda is a thought leader, we reaffirm our commitment to feminist legal advocacy through legal aid, capacity building of female lawyers, coalition building, strategic litigation, and policy reform. We continue to amplify women's voices and to strengthen gender-responsive justice. The justices and her worship that are in the room are again testament to the ongoing effort of gender-responsive jurisprudence that is going on in the country. This forum is part of the commitment to provide space for dialogue, innovation, and transformative action across borders, to promote cross-learning and to share experiences. As we embark on today's discussion, I invite us to reflect boldly and practically on how we make the African human rights system more accessible and effective for women in fragile and conflict-affected states. We need to reflect on how we ensure litigation translates into sustained advocacy and tangible impact, tangible and meaningful impact at community and continental levels. There is quite a gap between community and continental, that whatever we do speaks to both of those constituencies. We must also look at how we stand in solidarity across borders so that no woman, wherever she lives, is left behind. And we should also consider embracing universal jurisdiction, not merely as a principle of last resort, but as a proactive tool for justice in our region. Distinguished guests, your presence here affirms our shared commitment to women's equality and dignity. Let us work together to weave national, regional, and international threads of accountability into a strong fabric of justice. Justice for women in the Greater Horn of Africa is not only possible, it is achievable if we can act together across borders. Before I hand over the microphone, I want to thank the team that put this together. I'm always proud to be associated, even when it sounds rhetoric, but I'm genuinely proud to be associated with you all and with SIHA, the Strategic Initiative for the Horn of Africa, for supporting this activity that we have today. I welcome you once again, and I wish all of us fruitful deliberations. This message is from the Secretariat and the board that are represented in the room today. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think I read your mind. I would like to take this opportunity to invite the delegated guest of honor, Ambassador Leonard Mugera, to come and give us his opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. Since we haven't had breakfast, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The chair of the board, FIDA Uganda, the executive officer, justices from the honorable justices from the Ugandan judiciary, distinguished delegates from the Greater Horn of Africa countries represented here, representatives of civil society, senior government officials, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure, on behalf of the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Vincent Bagire, to welcome the participants from the Greater Horn of Africa and indeed all the stakeholders to this important regional forum. I would like in particular to thank FIDA Uganda and the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa for organizing this event, which is focusing on regional mechanisms for enforcement of women's rights and also for inviting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm accompanied by my colleague, Anne Nyakato, who is a counselor in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs plays a central role in coordinating Uganda's foreign policy within the regional blocs, including the AU, the East African Community, IGAD, and ICGLR. These regional bodies and institutions provide a lot of opportunities for member states to promote integration, solidarity, mutual accountability on all issues that are cutting across borders, including women's rights, development, and inclusive government. Peace and security remains a top priority, and Uganda, to the landmark resolution by the UN Security Council, and that is Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, which calls for full involvement of women in preventing, resolving, as well as in initiatives on peace building, accountability, and justice. This is so important, and Uganda has been taking measures in all of the time. These conflicts, I'm sorry to say, but the protagonists are mostly men. And when these conflicts are being wound down, and we are looking at solutions, less women are involved in finding the solutions to these conflicts. And the argument is that if we had more women involved, not only in seeking solutions then we would have an important landmark outcome that Uganda continues to implement and report on. Uganda has also been at the forefront of regional discussions on climate change and migration, and we've hosted the Kampala Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change. Again, there are a number of consequences arising out of climate change that are disproportionately affecting women and causing a lot of injustice in that regard. Distinguished participants, the ministry supports bilateral and multilateral engagements with countries in the Greater Horn of Africa, focusing on peace and integration. And we, as I've said, believe that empowerment of women, that advancement of women's rights is both a moral imperative and a strategic intervention, given the crucial role that women play in our societies. We have ratified and domesticated key international and regional instruments, including the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Maputo Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, as well as the United Nations International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, among others. And we have not only ratified these instruments, but we continue to regularly report on the implementation of these important instruments at the national level. And we collaborate at the regional level in order to make sure that they are implemented even across the countries, because some of these issues are cross-cutting and they cannot be solved by only one country. In terms of women empowerment, there are several initiatives, and I think our colleagues from the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development are here. The number of initiatives that have been taken in order to empower women economically, including the recent GROW project, which aims at promoting entrepreneurship and business, providing affordable capital in order to make sure that women can be able to participate in the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, as I pointed out, there are a number of instruments that have been agreed upon, but the most important thing, and this is why initiatives like this are so important, is to share experiences across the region on what works, where the gaps are, and what we need to do in order to make sure that in cases where we see injustice, whether it's in terms of women not being able to access collateral, get capital for business, whether it's because their rights have been taken away through some of our patriarchal systems, to make sure that we share experiences on how these issues can be addressed, and the equality of women is ensured. As I conclude, I would like to reiterate Uganda's firm commitment to multilateralism and regional cooperation in advancing equality and empowerment of women. We will continue to work with the African Union, other institutions and agencies to ensure that voices of African women are heard, that gender-based violence is addressed and stopped, and that justice is not bound by borders. I therefore commend the organizers of this important forum and each and every one of you for making the time to attend. And it's now my pleasure once again to wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for making the time to reiterate the government's commitment to some of these processes that are important to today's conversation. it is clear from the first two people that have spoken, the CEO and the ambassador, that the African continent, even with the several challenges that we are talking about today, is not without legal frameworks, is not without any conventions or any treaties that we are committing to, that we are working towards. I mean, if we even speak about broadly, we look at the SDGs, the Agenda 2030, that still guides a lot of the work that we do. So thank you very, very much, Ambassador, for making your remarks and reiterating that commitment. I would like to use this opportunity to welcome the CEO, who will then welcome, because I do not have shoes big enough for me to welcome our board chair, but also who is our keynote giver today, Justice Susan Okalani, to give her keynote.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Justice Okalani heads the FIDA board. We have two board members in the room, Her Worship Chovika and Sarah Anzoa. She was seated on the same table. I don't know where she has, oh, she's right there. I have the honor to invite Lady Justice Susan Okalani to give the keynote address. I need not introduce her. When you finish listening to the keynote address, you will truly know what she is passionate about. Lady Justice, you're welcome.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. If you hear me shouting, it's because of my prosecutorial background. At the time, there were no microphones in the courts, so you had to speak loudly. The mics just came 10 years ago. Dear esteemed guests, I warmly welcome you all in your respective roles and capacities to this regional Gender Forum, which is a significant occasion for women's rights in the Horn of Africa. I specifically welcome our sisters from Kenya, from Ethiopia, from Sudan. I think that there might be those from South Sudan and Tanzania. You're most welcome. This regional gender forum is being held under the theme Justice Beyond Borders, Regional Mechanisms and Women's Human Rights in the Greater Horn of Africa. I will have to read my paper because if I don't, we might find ourselves at midday, still here listening to me. This theme invites us all to reflect on the important issues such as the current access to justice for women in conflict-affected states across the Greater Horn of Africa and the existing gaps. It highlights the exciting opportunities to improve access to justice through alternative routes, especially when women face various forms of violence amidst conflicts. This theme encourages us to ask ourselves and truly think about the important questions. Where would I turn if I woke up in a state of war in my home country? How would my family and I manage to survive? This thing happened to one of our colleagues. We had just attended a conference in Ethiopia, also organized by SIHA. And 2 weeks later, she told us, I'm in Uganda because Sudan was in war. And she was requesting for assistance. So for many women in the Greater Horn of Africa, this is not a hypothetical situation, but their reality. The region has been severely impacted by civil and political unrest. Conflict-related sexual violence continues to be a widespread problem in the Greater Horn of Africa. I'll just do a brief review of the context in a few of the countries in the Greater Horn of Africa. In South Sudan, civil war from 2013 to 2018 entrenched rape, abduction, forced marriage as methods of terror. Years later, women in IDP camps still face conflict-related sexual violence due to the lack of effective justice institutions. According to the United Nations, between 2013 and 2020, more than 3,000 cases of conflict-related sexual violence were documented in South Sudan. However, the true figure is likely much higher due to underreporting. In Somalia, including Sharia and compel survivors to marry their perpetrators instead of pursuing prosecution. Weak state structures and the dominance of non-state justice system worsen impunity. The terrorist group Al-Shabaab has carried out, including forced marriages, rape, sexual slavery. The group's control over large parts of the country, the vulnerability of women and girls, the use of sexual violence, or what is now termed sexual terrorism, as a tactic of terror, has had, particularly in the areas under the Al-Shabaab control. And there is always a tendency by system actors in the region to think that terrorism is a very different thing from war crimes and crimes against humanity. Even in the relatively stable Uganda, where you are at today, fragility manifests in various ways. High rates of domestic violence and child marriage, discriminatory land tenure, and the burdens of hosting Africa's largest refugee population. Women and girls in refugee settlements face an increased risk of exploitation and denial of justice. Uganda, which has faced many conflicts in the past and continues to grapple with its transitional justice agenda, with survivors of the Lord's Resistance Army conflict still awaiting reparations decades later. The successful prosecution of Thomas Kwoyelo, a former LRA commander, who was convicted of 44 counts of crimes against humanity, war crimes and other crimes, including rape and sexual enslavement, and the conviction by the ICC of Dominic Ongwen, also a former LRA commander, convicted of 61 counts of crimes against humanity, war crimes and other offenses, including forced marriage, rape, sexual slavery, marks a significant milestone in the pursuit of justice for victims and survivors. I want to repeat that so that you clap. And I say, the successful prosecution of Thomas Kwoyelo, a former LRA commander, by the International Crimes Division of the High Court of the Republic of Uganda, albeit after 15 years, is still something worth celebrating. And this did not come from heaven. The collection of the synergies that enable that case to finally take off is something that was just the passion of the International Crimes Division, judges, registrars, and other officers. We cannot even begin to compare ourselves with the infrastructure of the ICC. But what we are saying is that it is still possible. Nevertheless, despite these convictions, the legal framework for reparations to victims of war crimes and crimes against humanity remains inadequate. The orders issued in Kwoyelo's case for reparations to victims are still unfulfilled, leaving many without the redress they rightfully deserve. Moreover, hundreds of thousands of victims of the LRA war crimes have not yet had their day in court, as many of their attackers received amnesty and may never face prosecution, despite the decision of the Supreme Court that indeed those who committed egregious crimes should be tried. But you see, the courts face the brunt of criticism by civil society, but for us in court to us, we are not supposed to look for the cases. It would be funny, actually, if we started doing that. The absence of a comprehensive transitional justice mechanism in Uganda has resulted in many victims being denied access to truth, to justice, and to reparations. Additionally, the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, continues to recruit children from Uganda into its ranks in the DRC through human trafficking, engaging in sexual slavery and other forms of exploitation. Their agenda is to marry off children as young as 11, 12, 13 years and have those same children produce future terrorists. In Kenya, and the Kenyans, please forgive me if I sound like a broken record because I really don't know what happened. I got this online. Conflict-related sexual violence, particularly during the 2007 and 2008 post-election violence, was extensively reported, with estimates indicating that over 900 cases of rape and other forms of sexual violence took place. According to the Kenya National Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, Justice and Support, Sudan is overwhelmed by conflict. Since April 2023, more than 372 cases of sexual violence have been recorded by SIHA, nearly a quarter involving girls, along with 236 enforced disappearances of women and girls. Most of these remain unresolved. Hunger and displacement have driven families into child marriage and survival sex, while over 2.2 million displaced individuals face trafficking, abduction, and sexual slavery in their quest for food and water and shelter. In Ethiopia, there is yet a threat of another clash. While they are still recovering from the armed unrest in the Tigray region following the cessation of hostilities in November 2022. The Tigray conflict was characterized by systemic sexual violence, including gang rape, forced pregnancy, forced witnessing of atrocities, and deliberate HIV transmission carried out by multiple armed actors, and this amounts to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Even after the 2022 cessation of hostilities agreement, violence continued, while impartial AU and UN investigative mechanisms were prematurely shut down under the government's pressure. Survivors remain without credible remedies as the transitional justice process which has been widely criticized for lacking a survivor-centered approach and also for failing to hold perpetrators to account. In their statement at the 83rd Ordinary Session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, held in May 2025, the Strategic Initiative for the Horn of Africa, Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa, the SIHA network, indicated that they have documented 372 cases, with 24% involving young girls. The full functioning of the justice system in Sudan has been halted by ongoing conflict, making it difficult to investigate, prosecute cases, and thereby enabling perpetrators to continue committing various acts of sexual violence. And the story goes on and on and on and on. As we begin today's discussion, it's important to examine the body of work represented by the UN Security Council's resolutions as a framework for the enforcement of international humanitarian law, as well as international human rights law and international criminal law regarding conflict-related sexual violence. The current international and regional standards on this subject are incorporated within the various treaty laws related to IHL, IHRL, and ICL principles. Most of these principles indeed refer to the aims and principles of the UN member states as outlined in Chapter 1 of the UN Charter. particularly concerning international peace, security, and justice. The Security Council's resolutions under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which grants enforcement powers to the Security Council, which is the body responsible for maintaining international peace and security. They therefore serve as a very crucial framework for implementing IHRL, and ICL principles and standards regarding conflict-related sexual violence. Although the binding effect of UN Security Council resolutions is not explicit or categorical, they serve as a guide in emphasizing the obligations of the UN member states and the measures that they must undertake to address conflict-related sexual violence. UN member states are required to adhere to and follow this guidance. And the Horn of Africa, Greater Horn of Africa countries represented here are members of the UN. I will briefly look at some of the resolutions. UN Security Council Resolution 1325 launched the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. It urges parties to armed conflicts to respect fully and apply international laws concerning the rights and protection of girls and women, particularly civilians. This includes obligations under the Geneva Conventions 1949 and their additional protocols of 1977, as well as 1951 and the Refugee Convention and its protocol of 1967. Of course, not to forget the CEDAW and its optional protocol, and then the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child, plus its additional protocols. It reminds parties to consider relevant provisions of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The resolution further calls on all parties to take special measures